The following is an HDNet original presentation.
Tonight, the dawn of a new era in nuclear power.
The United States is running 104 reactors safely, 20% of our electricity.
Well, I hear the phrase nuclear renaissance. Are we in the midst of a nuclear renaissance?
We're in it.
Also, corrective rape. Women in South Africa targeted because of their sexuality.
The media is reporting on it, NGOs are documenting these cases, and women are coming forward to talk about what has happened to them.
And recount more problems with electronic voting machines.
We have found errors in virtually every county where we've looked at the data.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports. Good evening. There was a time, and those of you old enough will remember it well, when nuclear power seemed like the future. Then came the meltdowns and the radioactive waste, and nuclear energy became a dirty word. There are still many fair-minded people who say they are worried about nuclear energy, but around the world, countries are rushing to embrace nuclear power. Even the Obama administration supports it because it produces no greenhouse gases. Two significant hurdles make nuclear the underdog of energy options. Number one, its price tag, and number two, what to do with the radioactive waste it generates. So what if there was a way to build nuclear power plants that were smaller, more affordable, and that even solved, or at least greatly reduced, the waste issue? Tonight, radical ideas to jumpstart a nuclear revival.
If I'm right, Dan, then the United States would lead the world in a new clean energy source. If I'm right, we'll put this country on a path to get rid of nuclear waste.
Nuclear scientist Dr. Eric Lowen oversees advanced reactor designs at GE Hitachi, a joint venture building nuclear reactors all over the world. Esquire magazine called him the man who is going to save the world, and he's trying to do it from a modest cubicle in Wilmington, North Carolina, with a new nuclear reactor called the PRISM.
Take me through what its attributes are. Why should I be interested? Why should we want to do it?
This reactor is unique because it generates electricity that comes from what we perceive as waste today. So we can take used nuclear fuel. There's 53,000 metric tons around the country at different nuclear power plants. That's what you could use for fuel for this PRISM reactor.
Lowen says now is the time for the United States to reassert its leadership on the nuclear stage.
It's our technology, and we should exploit it.
10,000 scientists and engineers are at work to prove that atomic energy does not mean only the atomic bomb.
There was a time when America clearly led the world in nuclear technology.
A new landmark rises at Pleasanton.
America's top minds built the world's first nuclear reactors in the 1950s, and by the 1970s, nuclear power plants were coming online rapidly across the country.
Oh my God, kid, it's that pump.
But in 1979, everything changed. A movie called The China Syndrome frightened audiences with its fictional depiction of a nuclear accident. And just 12 days after the movie's release, it happened in real life at Pennsylvania's 3 Mile Island. Then came the 1986 Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine, and nuclear became a dirty word. For 30 years, not a single new nuclear plant was started in the United States. And for most of us, that's pretty much where the story of nuclear energy ended. But the United States never stopped using nuclear power, even at 3 Mile Island, where the remaining reactor still provides electricity for 800,000 homes.
The United States is running 104 reactors safely, 20% of our electricity.
Well, I hear the phrase nuclear renaissance. Are we in the midst of a nuclear renaissance?
We're in it. And the reason why we're in it is because they're building 50 plants, 50 new nuclear power plants across the world. GE Hitachi is still building reactors. We're building them in Taiwan. We're building them in Japan. We've never stopped.
Dozens of new nuclear power plants are being built around the world, but only one of those is, finally, being built in the United States.
We have equivalent to about 5 football fields that we have excavated down 90 feet. So it's a pretty massive project.
It's a massive project with a massive price tag, $14 billion for 2 reactors that utility giant Southern Company is building in eastern Georgia. If all goes as planned, the reactors will start up in 2016 and 2017, providing lots of carbon-free electricity, but also generating lots of radioactive waste. It's a toxic brew that will be around long after everything else is gone, generating dangerous radiation for thousands of years. Right now, most of it's stored temporarily in pools of water. After it cools, it can be moved to concrete and steel casks like these. But Eric Lowen says that's where his reactor, the PRISM, comes in, since it runs on this very waste.
So these are the wastes. These are fuel. So
Lowen sketched out the basic idea. He described how the PRISM would have an on-site processing facility to recycle nuclear waste.
When you say recycle, is it a version of what we do with our newspapers and cardboard and tin cans? I mean, we don't throw them away.
Exactly.
Here's how it works. In traditional nuclear power plants, the atoms on uranium fuel rods are split, releasing neutrons. Those neutrons pass through water, slow down, and strike other uranium atoms, creating a chain reaction. The water heats up and drives a steam turbine to create electricity. Less than 1% of the uranium is used. The remaining 99% is considered waste. But the PRISM uses liquid sodium as a coolant instead of water. The uranium atoms are split, just like in a traditional reactor, but when the neutrons contact the liquid sodium, they don't slow down. And that means they have the energy to split other kinds of atoms, such as atoms from radioactive waste or plutonium from weapons. The PRISM uses its fuel much more efficiently and continuously recycles its waste. The waste left over from the PRISM reactor, shown in this design, would have a much shorter radioactive lifetime, 300 years instead of 1 million. And Lowen told us the reactor will automatically shut down if it starts to overheat.
Is it safe?
Yes, it is safe.
Safer than what we have now?
Yes.
Why?
Because it relies on physics to be able to shut it down and not the computer and the human. And if you believe in gravity, if you believe that hot air rises and those sort of things, then you can believe that this is safer.
But here's the catch. Right now, the PRISM reactor only exists on these thousands of pages of blueprints on Lowen's bookcase. He says the technology exists to build it. It's the political will that's lacking.
This is our generation's Sputnik moment. We're telling America's scientists and engineers that if they assemble teams of the best minds in their fields and focus on the hardest problems in clean energy, we'll fund the Apollo projects of our time.
President Obama has gotten behind traditional reactors in a big way, calling for $36 billion in loan guarantees to incentivize utilities to get going.
This is a budget where the president has made some very tough choices.
But when Secretary of Energy Stephen Chu laid out the details of the administration's 2012 budget, there was only $40 million allocated for research into recycling, and it was clear the Department of Energy considers technologies like the PRISM still decades away.
Well, the Department of Energy has called for what it calls the most promising of the recycling technologies to be identified by 2040 with an eye to commercialization by 2050. Are you okay with that pace?
No, we completely disagree. The U.S. has that solution. We call it PRISM. And we think we can start today to help Secretary Chu with 3 of his biggest challenges.
This is the Secretary of Energy.
Yes, Secretary Chu, the Secretary of Energy. So he has 3 problems. His job is to get rid of the weapons-grade plutonium, because we have a treaty with Russia. He also has an obligation to do something with the nuclear waste by law. And third, he's made a commitment to the President to reduce his greenhouse gas emissions across the DOE complex by 30%.
How soon could we do it?
Tomorrow. We would start tomorrow.
Well, what's the problem here? What do we need to follow the plan that you outlined?
What's needed is a prioritization with the Department of Energy, and that prioritization to say, all right, let's take some of our funds and use that for a licensing process for the PRISM reactor.
Funding the demonstration plant would take, what, about $2.5 billion?
I think a better way to look at it, Dan, is not funding. It's the government buying from industry a reactor to help them with problems that they have, with greenhouse gas emissions, with excess plutonium, and with nuclear waste. The government buys other things. They buy jet airplanes. They buy submarines. Right. Okay, so we're there to do what our government asks of us, and we're there to sell a PRISM reactor.
My name is John Deal. My friends call me Grizz, and I sell $100 million nuclear power plants.
If Eric Lowen is a soft-spoken corporate nuclear engineer, Grizz Deal has a drastically different style and product.
So this idea of big centralized...
He is a serial entrepreneur with an advanced degree in geography. For the past 4 years, he's been working rooms at a relentless pace, trying to drum up money for what he calls mini reactors.
You know that nuclear power is the cleanest, cheapest, safest way to generate heat, steam, and electricity. Hands down.
Deal and his sister, Deborah Blackwell, started a company they call Hyperion Power. If this brother-sister team has their way, Hyperion will one day become the Henry Ford of the nuclear industry, mass-producing small reactors in a factory at a fraction of the price.
Part of our design criteria was that it would be small enough to fit on the back of a truck, that it could be transported.
We've all seen pictures of big nuclear power plants. How much smaller? Are we talking about something the size of this chair? Or?
Well, if you took we love this analogy. Yes. I don't know who started this crap. If you took 2 hot tubs, stuck them on top of each other, that'd be about the right size.
Grizz got the idea for a hot tub-sized reactor when he was entrepreneur in residence at the famed Los Alamos National Lab in New Mexico, where the first atomic bombs were invented. One engineer there had a design for a small nuclear reactor, and Grizz acquired the rights.
What's been the demand? Are the phones ringing off the hook for this?
Absolutely. We've got nearly 10,000 inquiries all around the globe, but 90% of them are outside the U.S.
Each one of his reactors only powers 20,000 homes, but Deal says his reactor would be perfect for places you wouldn't normally think of as viable for nuclear energy. A remote military base, a Caribbean island, or a mining operation, not to mention the developing world.
2/3 of the planet doesn't have any electricity, that's on a stable basis, and 1/3 has none whatsoever. If you don't have electricity, you don't have clean water, you don't have hospitals, you don't have sewage. And so this has become a very, very critical part about, a critical aspect of our company.
Okay, that's there.
While Grizz has been busy raising money, his sister Deborah has worked on the regulatory angle in Washington, D.C.
What's been the reaction on Capitol Hill to the small modular reactors?
Well, it's evolved over time. 4 years ago when I came here, I was the redhead with the reactor and the crazy ideas, and so we've come an incredibly far way. We really have.
But in many ways, Hyperion is just approaching the starting line. There are big hurdles they need to clear before they can get even a license to operate in the United States. Last September, engineers and nuclear scientists for the company presented their preliminary design concepts to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in Silver Spring, Maryland. The NRC oversees nuclear reactors and licenses new designs.
Structural materials right now are expected to be either HT9
Here, the talk was highly technical. The nuts and bolts for Hyperion's entry into the field of what are known as small modular reactors.
Have you given initial thoughts to the system you would need to melt the lead bismuth?
It's probably going to have to be, again, it's not designed yet, but it's going to be on
Even though their reactor hasn't been built or licensed, Hyperion says they have customer commitments for 133 units at $100 million a pop. And they expect to be on the ground within 5 years in South Africa or Brazil. But the regulatory process in the U.S. is a meticulous, torturous one. And the NRC says that's intentional.
Bottom line is these are very complicated machines, and in the end, our focus is on safety. So we want to take the time to make sure we do it right.
Dr. Gregory Yoshko is the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
I'm going to call on your experience in Congress now, again, and asking from straight, candid talk. Is or is not Hyperion hyping its ability to get to the market quickly?
Well, it's not really the role probably of the NRC to decide what the market will accept or not accept. And certainly from our perspective, in the kinds of discussions we're having with Hyperion, they are much more in the conceptual stage.
But Grizz says that's just the bureaucracy inhibiting innovation.
The NRC doesn't necessarily agree with it, but we announced last January that we'd be ready to submit in the fiscal year 2012, which is really soon. The NRC's response was, we'll get to you in 10 years. The NRC is predisposed to work with light water reactors, as is Department of Energy, Nuclear Energy. Now, I don't want to pick a fight. Okay, I will pick a fight if we have to. But I got to tell you that we're starting design certification outside the U.S. in 3 countries within the next 9 months. The U.S. may be last. I'm so tired of being last. We would like to make them here in the U.S., right? We think that we can bring thousands of jobs and a huge tax base. We've got a country talking about building 2,000 to 3,000 $100 million devices.
That's China.
That's China. Wouldn't that be great if we had some of that tax revenue, if we had some of those jobs?
If the U.S. continues to be slow to move on this concept, you've said we'll end up importing it from overseas.
Well, the U.S. is a culture we're really good at inventing stuff, but we're not so good at the follow-through. We've lost microchips, we've lost flat panels, we've lost automobiles, we've lost so many things. But with nuclear power, the U.S. and the U.K. were really the innovators. We were the guys that made it happen.
So we still have the opportunity to dominate.
We still have an opportunity to do it, and we should do it.
Welcome back. Tonight we've been looking at a fight over the quest for nuclear power. We've met 2 men selling different visions that each said would revolutionize energy production. But both Eric Lowen of GE Hitachi and Grizz Deal of Hyperion Power had a similar complaint. The Obama administration, like administrations before it, is being too timid in embracing the future.
So, welcome to our MIT reactor.
To try to understand where the administration is coming from, we headed up to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to meet physics professor Ernest Moniz.
Very high neutron flux.
MIT has its own nuclear reactor for research. It was first opened in the 1950s, and Dr. Moniz gave us a tour.
This is, of course, a rather small version of what you might see out there at a big power reactor.
Dr. Moniz is not just a world-renowned scientist, but also an expert on policy, who served in President Clinton's administration and now is on President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. He says technologies like the PRISM and small Hyperion reactors are interesting, but since we haven't built a nuclear power plant in 30 years, the focus has to be on what we know.
I believe personally that we need to move towards establishing or reestablishing the nuclear option quickly. The only game in town, in my view, for some number of years is going to be evolutionary designs based upon what we've done in the past.
Well, we've talked to not just 1 or 2, but a number of scientists and entrepreneurs who do have an entirely different vision for nuclear power.
Mm-hmm.
They've got designs that are smaller, cheaper, and that even recycle the waste. Now, they say that they're concerned that the United States is going down the wrong path by not embracing all of the alternative technology, or fixing our vision with the look-ahead technology rather than the look-back technology.
My view is that I strongly support developing these technologies. We may have a different view as to the maturity of those technologies. As I say, it's fine to say one has this technology that's never been built, that's never gone through a licensing process, which is inherently tortuous in the nuclear business.
And takes time.
Takes time, absolutely. So that's why I feel, and I feel like I'm a technology Luddite or something in saying this, that for the next 10, 20 years, if we're going to build nuclear power, it's going to be fundamentally based around what you see and the technological evolutions, so-called Generation 3+ reactors.
Dr. Moniz says that critics who paint the Obama administration as stuck in the past are misguided, and that even in tough economic times, the president is asking Congress for hundreds of millions of dollars for basic nuclear research. The president just thinks the money is better spent there than on specific projects like the PRISM reactor.
Why take more time researching this when, as Eric Lowen argues, we have the solution now?
Well, to be perhaps too blunt, I suggest that perhaps the word cost was used infrequently in discussing these technologies. The question is, will these technologies ultimately compete in the marketplace to produce electricity? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. That's part of the research and development and ultimately demonstration that I believe we need. So what we're saying is, look, this is decades away from being implemented at large scale. Why don't we come back a bit first, explore a wider set of options, maybe we'll find something better, and we'll get there in 25 or 30 years in terms of what would be a possible recycling approach, and understand, will it compete economically in the marketplace?
The cost of building nuclear power plants is expensive, very, even for existing technologies. The plant being built in Georgia could only be financed because Congress allocated billions of dollars in loan guarantees. And Dr. Moniz supports President Obama's request for another $36 billion in loan guarantees.
I, in the end, feel that a limited program of federal support is warranted, and I support the idea of doing that.
Unlimited. Is $36 billion, could that be considered in the world of nuclear power limited?
Well, nuclear power is large in scale, but we should understand that this is not a commitment of $36 billion. It is a loan guarantee, and in principle, we hope the public will have no cost whatsoever. What's important here is that a nuclear power plant, essentially all the costs are up front. When you operate it, it's very, very inexpensive. So you need $5, $6, $7 billion to build one plant. So the idea here is to share the financing risk, because Wall Street right now, coming to finance a new nuclear power plant, would charge an enormous premium.
As for what to do with the nuclear waste, Dr. Moniz is serving on a presidential commission to study the problem. The commission was launched by President Obama after he shut down the storage program at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. Dr. Moniz believes the best thing to do with the waste for the next few decades is to store it in those casks at ground level.
For now, store the fuel, don't do anything fancy. It preserves your options, it's safe, and it's cheap.
Which means you can not use it, or at some future date you can decide to try to recycle it.
To recycle it, right. And if in 40 or 50 years we find that recycling is the preferred approach on the basis of economics, of waste management, of not exacerbating nuclear proliferation concerns, well, fine. Then we have the spent fuel, in a dry storage, and we can use it then.
Dr. Moniz does say, however, that there's an excitement about nuclear energy that he hasn't seen in years, and that once again, the field of nuclear power is attracting some of the best young minds in the country. Have we fallen behind in nuclear research?
I'm afraid we have, I would say, overall. We went through a long period where, well, we were not building reactors. When you're not building reactors, you're not encouraging a lot of research, and you're not encouraging young people to come into the field. So frankly, over these years, well, France and Russia and Japan, for example, Korea have had much more active programs. I'm pleased to see, I think we're coming back.
Do you want this one? Okay.
And that brings us to the final chapter of our report on nuclear energy. From the future to the past and a lush backyard garden in Idaho. There, a retired nuclear engineer with a story to tell now spends his days tending to the roses instead of unleashing the power of the atom. Legendary Dr. Charles Till has a wall full of degrees that speak to his expertise in the field of nuclear engineering. He reached his greatest renown not far from his current home in the remote desert of eastern Idaho. Here, amidst the sagebrush, is the national lab where Till once served as associate director. He came here decades ago when this region was hot with the excitement of the nuclear age.
It was the field for engineers and scientists. It was new. It was not weapons. It was an inexhaustible source of energy for mankind.
It was here that nuclear fission first generated electricity, lighting up a string of light bulbs in 1951. Power lines ran from here to the nearby town of Arco, the first town powered by atomic energy. And when Till came here in 1985, he helped launch a project that he thought would revolutionize nuclear energy once again.
The reactor is there under the dome. When the fuel is...
It was called the Integral Fast Reactor, or IFR.
It is highly radioactive. It's brought out through a transfer tunnel there and into the fuel conditioning facility.
Its technology was the basis for the PRISM reactor that GE Hitachi is now trying to market. It would recycle its own waste, as well as use radioactive waste from other reactors or nuclear weapons as fuel.
The principal thing was to develop a reactor that would use fuel so efficiently that it would provide electrical power in any amount forever. That was the principal thing. You could replace all of the energy generated in the United States today, not just electricity, gasoline, natural gas, whatever, all of it for 1,000 years, just with the spent fuel from the light water reactors of today.
The project began under President Reagan, and by the late 1980s, the Department of Energy was funding the IFR to the tune of $100 million a year. At its height, it employed 1,500 scientists and engineers, world experts in their fields. But when President Clinton came into office, the political winds began to change.
In the President Clinton's State of the Union address that year, I was rather concerned about what he might say and listened to it very carefully.
We're eliminating programs that are no longer needed, such as nuclear power research and development. We're slashing.
Well, we were the only program in advanced reactor development in the country, so I had a fairly shrewd notion of who it was aimed at.
And President Clinton had a powerful ally in cutting the program, Massachusetts Senator John Kerry.
And for those who come to the floor with all these line item vetoes and balanced budget amendments and all these techniques to control spending, here's the technique to control spending. Vote to cut this program.
Kerry came to the Senate floor with charts demonstrating all the money he said had been spent with no payoff.
We don't have anything to show for that.
By September 1994, government funding was cut and Till's project was over. Now the reactor sits idle, the machine rooms eerily empty, and the dials gathering dust. The end of the program was hailed at the time as a budget-saving measure. But Dr. Till says 10 years and $1 billion worth of promising research
were thrown down the drain.
We were only a couple of years away from proving the whole concept, and the end came without anyone coming out to this Idaho desert and asking, what is it that we're destroying? It was just gone. And I wish it hadn't happened that way.
Charles Till wasn't the only one watching President Clinton's State of the Union with dismay. So too was Eric Lowen, who now wants to bring Till's technology to market with his PRISM reactor.
Well, at the time, President Clinton wrote that the IFR has no continued commercial value, and Senator John Kerry called it, and I quote, a waste and a danger. With time to look back on it, were they right?
They were completely wrong. Today, if we would have gone ahead, we would have given ourselves a technology portfolio that's broader than we have now. We would show a different way to get rid of our used nuclear fuel, and we'd have solutions to meet the President's goals for getting to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions.
And what would it have done for the economy?
We would have then exported clean technology jobs, just like we did in the 50s when we had the courage under Eisenhower to try to commercialize water-cooled reactors. So we would have been on that next wave of the next technologies for nuclear power.
It's a message that Dr. Lowen feels America's next generation of leaders, scientists, and engineers needs to hear.
So nuclear power is one of the fundamental energy sources of the universe.
As the president-elect of the prestigious American Nuclear Society, he travels the world trying to raise awareness of the potential of nuclear power and his belief that it is the key to a brighter future. One of the things that struck us in reporting this story is that those who favored the president's approach and those who criticize it for being too wedded to the past both share an enthusiasm for launching the United States into a new nuclear age. Both sides say the questions of safety have been answered and that the problems of nuclear waste can be solved. The dispute is over how we prioritize projects and research in a time of budget restraint. How should we balance investment with the need to spend within our means? How should we stay competitive in the world economy? These are questions that are not limited to the nuclear arena, but strike at the heart of the debate about our future. And now we take you to Africa, where issues of human rights, individual rights, including gay rights, are hot-button topics, even more so than in the United States. And that's because homosexuality is banned outright in 38 African countries, and in 3 countries it is punishable by death. South Africa is the lone country on the continent with laws that specifically ban all discrimination based on sexual orientation. But that doesn't mean that gays and lesbians living there are safe. In Cape Town, South Africa, homosexuals live more openly than anywhere else in Africa. We were allowed to film this small gathering of gays, lesbians, and their supporters, something that would have been all but impossible elsewhere on the continent. Despite their openness, homosexual men and women often face violent backlash for their sexuality. And in South Africa, they are dealing with a particularly heinous type of attack on lesbians. It is called corrective rape.
Corrective rape is when the men really they think that they can change your sexuality.
Funika Soldat has been attacked twice for her sexual orientation. In 1993, she was stabbed more than 20 times and spent weeks recovering in the hospital. Then in 1995, she was attacked again. This time, she was raped.
One of them said, "I've told you one day I will get you."
Rape has long been an underreported problem in South Africa, and now lesbians' more open lifestyle is making them targets in this male-dominated society.
Early in my life, I started to talk out about my sexuality, being out as a lesbian. And I think it didn't go well to some of the men. And I think it's when they decided that they have to hurt me, maybe expecting that I will change. But unfortunately, it didn't work like that way.
It's too soon to make monuments for all we are losing, for the lack of truth.
After her attack, Soldat tried to report her rape to the police, but they refused to take her statement. And she says they criticized her for dressing like a man.
When I reported the incident to the police, it was like a joke. You see, they were not interested in the case. They were just interested on the way I was dressing, more than the case, and as if really I deserve it. The police are homophobic. Yeah, they are homophobic.
No one has ever been arrested or questioned for Soldat's rape, and not much has changed since her attack 14 years ago. She says the police are still not helping.
And people really are still struggling with the police. People, something happens, they stay home. They don't go to the police because they don't see any reason why do they have to go to the police. Because I mean, it's a second victimization.
Soldat runs a safe house for lesbians and says at least one lesbian victim turns up at her house every weekend. But hard numbers are tough to come by.
We don't have crime statistics that tell us the extent of the problem.
Liesel Gernholz is the director of the Women's Rights Division at Human Rights Watch. She is South African and served on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid was banned. Has there been a recent increase in corrective rape, at least known reported cases in South Africa?
We don't know that because the police don't collect information about the motivation for rape. So if a lesbian woman goes in to report a rape, she may or may not be asked by the police why she was raped. And if they do ask her, they may not record it. What we do know certainly is that there are large numbers of women who are being targeted because the media is reporting on it, NGOs are documenting these cases, and women are coming forward to talk about what has happened to them.
How long has, quote, corrective rape been a problem, a big problem in South Africa?
My suspicion is that this is not something that's very recent, that this is something that's been happening and it's been relatively invisible in South Africa before the Yudi Simelane case.
In April 2008, Yudi Simelane, a 31-year-old professional soccer player and local hero, was last seen leaving this bar. She never made it home. Simelane was found beaten, stabbed, and raped on the banks of a dirty stream halfway between her home and the tavern. Mali Simelane remembers the day the police told her that her daughter was dead.
I said, what happened? They've killed her. Is she a soccer lady, a celebrity? I said, no, she's not a celebrity, she's a soccer lady. They've killed her. I said, it's not her. It's not her.
But it was her.
We are with you all the time. We won't forget you. You are our baby. You are still our baby. Thank you.
Mali and her son, Yudi's brother, Emmanuel, still struggle with their loss. Each visit to Yudi's grave stirs up questions about why Yudi, a well-known and well-liked young woman, would be a target. But Mali suspects her daughter was brutally attacked for a reason.
Because they know how she was a lesbian.
And Yudi's friend Lindy says they are angry.
What made us so angry was that we could not believe how can such a person do that to her, because we believe that she was known in the community, so nobody will do that to her. And she has never hidden it that she's a lesbian.
Yudi Simelane was openly gay and an advocate for young lesbians. Her family says her attackers knew that and didn't like it.
We could see that they've tried to rape her. So to us immediately it was because it is somebody who knew her, that she is a lesbian, therefore they wanted to force themselves to her.
During the trial, the judge ruled that Yudi's sexuality was not a motive in the murder, infuriating Yudi's friends and family. They believe Yudi was a victim of corrective rape. Gay rights groups demonstrated for weeks outside the trial of the men accused of killing Simelane and the local papers started to publicly expose what Liesl Gernholz characterizes as a hate crime.
It's certainly something that targets a very specific set of people, in this case lesbian women, predominantly black lesbian women who are living in townships. So I think it very definitely falls within the broad definition of a hate crime.
Now, any number of groups, activist organizations, have asked the government to classify corrective rape as a hate crime. How would that change the protection of women?
Classifying it as a hate crime would allow for higher penalties. It would allow perhaps for the creation of specialized units to investigate, and it would also probably allow the police to make better referrals to other resources in the community, counseling, shelters, and so on, that would be more appropriate. But it's not going to stop it. It's not a preventive measure. No one is going to stop doing this because it's now a hate crime.
Ironically, South Africa has one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. It explicitly prohibits discrimination because of sexual orientation. Gay men and women in South Africa have more rights than most gay Americans, including legal same-sex marriage and the freedom to serve in the military. But Gernholz says cultural mores can sometimes prevent the implementation of even the most protective laws.
In South Africa, it's a particularly complex environment because on the one hand, we have this fabulous constitution that protects the rights of gay and lesbian people explicitly. And on the other hand, we have this very conservative, patriarchal society that says, you know, it's not okay for women not to have sex with men. Men are the heads of households, they're the leaders of communities. That really sort of still has very stark gender division of roles and responsibilities. And the leadership and the government is not excluded from that debate and that ambivalence.
And it is that cultural ambivalence that is forcing lesbians, particularly in the black townships, like these young soccer teammates, to live in fear for their own safety and the safety of their families.
In my area, there's a lot of gangsters, and other boys don't like lesbians, so I'm afraid.
After the murder of this great female soccer star, after her murder, what changed?
What changed, I think, is the recognition that lesbian women are being targeted, and that in some respects the police haven't always responded appropriately. In some respects the whole system of the criminal justice system hasn't been able to offer the kind of protection and then the kind of response that we would expect. I think what has also changed has been the recognition that we have to educate people, that we have to continue to work at creating a climate of tolerance, of acceptance of diversity.
The place where Judy Similani died is unremarkable, a low spot in a grassy field. And it would have stayed that way, but her family wanted to remind people of why she died. They built a small bridge that they hope will carry people not only over the muddy stream, but also across the divide of a misunderstood and persecuted lifestyle.
So it is important to us so that, number one, any other person who finds herself in the situation like you could be able to walk through that bridge. So we are hoping that if we can have a proper bridge, even if it's somebody who's not from the community, immediately to trick your mind, who's Judy? What happened to her? Therefore, the community will know more about gays and the lesbian, that they are people and we must also respect them.
And now an update on electronic voting machines. We've devoted considerable airtime on this program to malfunctions with these machines, all the way back to the presidential election in 2000, where punch cards and hanging chads were the issues. But in 2010, a concerned citizen in South Carolina began his own investigation into electronic voting machines when a no-name candidate trounced an established politician in the primary. Frank Handel is that concerned citizen, and the voting machines are Ivotronics, manufactured by the company ES&S. When we first brought you Frank's story, he'd filed numerous Freedom of Information requests and found, for the primary, that the machines seemed to be malfunctioning more than they should. Well, then came the general election last November, and Frank and his friends were at it again. Frank Heindel has a day job. He's a grain commodities broker and lives in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. But counting votes, not wheat, has become his passion. Heindel estimates he has made as many as 50 Freedom of Information requests so far, and what he has found is pretty interesting.
We found serious problems, votes not being counted, too many votes being certified, election files that have not been created by the voting machines. So there's a variety of problems that we found that the public has never been informed about without us going in and looking for this data.
Heindel has now requested all the electronic voting information from 10 counties. He started in his home county, Charleston, and then fanned out to counties that reported complaints or irregularities on Election Day. Now, with the help from a volunteer team of computer scientists, they are doing a citizen's audit of the data.
We're trying to bring together 3 computer files that we get through our FOIA request and trying to match those up and see if they can come up and match the certified totals that the counties have turned in.
It has to work that day, and it has to work well that day.
Duncan Buell is a professor of computer science at the University of South Carolina. He is one of the people helping Heindel parse the thousands of gigabytes of information obtained from his FOIA requests.
The asterisk indicates the beginning of a new vote. The number on the left is the iVotronic machine number.
Buell wrote a simple program that counts the votes directly from the ballots recorded inside the iVotronic.
So this is the file that we processed line by line to count votes to be able to come up with a total of the number of votes cast for every contest, for every precinct, for every iVotronic machine across the county.
Buell is then checking the numbers against the official certified results on South Carolina's website. Buell's audit has shown that the vote counting is, at best, sloppy.
We have found errors in virtually every county where we've looked at the data. There have been more or less errors in some counties than others, but I don't know that we have looked at data in any county and found no discrepancies.
Buell has found that in Richland County, where he voted, poll workers forgot to properly close out 6 machines, and the votes from those machines were left out of the final certified results.
It wasn't until a week later that on November 9th that the machines were closed, the votes were counted, or the votes were included, but by then the count had been certified, and there is apparently no way in South Carolina to go back and change a certified count even if you know it's wrong. So 772 votes did not get included in the count.
The official results are 47 votes more.
And in Charleston County, 13,000 votes were recorded that cannot be matched to any electronic ballot. It isn't clear if these phantom votes are real or the result of a computer glitch.
I think the system that we have is seriously flawed in not having this kind of cross-check. I mean, this is like, the bank not reconciling the accounts at the end of the day. This is like, somebody not ever balancing their checkbook for 20 years on end. I mean, this is just very straightforward stuff you do when it's important to get the right answer.
Buell has offered to give his vote cross-checking computer program to the Richland County Election Board for free and to help them use it. They have not accepted his offer yet, but they have agreed to meet with him. Heindel is still hard at work gathering more information and making more requests. He says he feels vindicated. His original theory that the machines are poorly designed is proving true, and he vows to keep working until every vote really is counted.
We need a transparent new system. I mean, it's just, we can't continue to run our elections on the kind of system that we have and look the voter in the eye and tell them we got a state-of-the-art system and your vote's counting. That's not true.
We asked ES&S, the makers of the Ivotronic, to comment, and they refuse. And it should be noted that these machines are not just tallying votes in South Carolina. Currently, Ivotronics are used in 19 states by 26 million voters. And that's our program for tonight. From New York, for HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night. If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net. There was a time when America clearly led the world in nuclear technology.
A new landmark rises at Pleasanton.
America's top minds built the world's first nuclear reactors in the 1950s, and by the 1970s, nuclear power plants were coming online rapidly across the country.
Oh my God, kid, it's that pump.
But in 1979, everything changed. A movie called The China Syndrome frightened audiences with its fictional depiction of a nuclear accident. And just 12 days after the movie's release, it happened in real life at Pennsylvania's 3 Mile Island. Then came the 1986 Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine, and nuclear became a dirty word. For 30 years, not a single new nuclear plant was started in the United States. And for most of us, that's pretty much where the story of nuclear energy ended. But the United States never stopped using nuclear power. Good evening. There was a time, and those of you old enough will remember it well, when nuclear power seemed like the future. Then came the meltdowns and the radioactive waste, and nuclear energy became a dirty word. There are still many fair-minded people who say they are worried about nuclear energy, but around the world, countries are rushing to embrace nuclear power. Even the Obama administration supports it because it produces no greenhouse gases. Two significant hurdles make nuclear the underdog of energy options. Number one, its price tag, and number two, what to do with the radioactive waste it generates. So what if there was a way to build nuclear power plants that were smaller, more affordable, and that even solved, or at least greatly reduced, the waste issue? Tonight, radical ideas to jumpstart a nuclear revival.
If I'm right, Dan, then the United States would lead the world in a new clean energy source.
The following is an HDNet original presentation.
Tonight, the dawn of a new era in nuclear power.
The United States is running 104 reactors safely, 20% of our electricity.
Well, I hear the phrase nuclear renaissance. Are we in the midst of a nuclear renaissance?
We're in it.
Also, corrective rape. Women in South Africa targeted because of their sexuality.
The media is reporting on it, NGOs are documenting these cases, and women are coming forward to talk about what has happened to them.
And recount more problems with electronic voting machines.
We have found errors in virtually every county where we've looked at the data.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports.
if I'm right, will put this country on a path to get rid of nuclear waste.
Nuclear scientist Dr. Eric Lowen oversees advanced reactor designs at GE Hitachi, a joint venture building nuclear reactors all over the world. Esquire magazine called him the man who is going to save the world, and he's trying to do it from a modest cubicle in Wilmington, North Carolina, with a new nuclear reactor called the PRISM.
Take me through what its attributes are. Why should I be interested? Why should we want to do it?
This reactor is unique because it generates electricity that comes from what we perceive as waste today. So we can take used nuclear fuel. There's 53,000 metric tons around the country at different nuclear power plants. That's what you could use for fuel for this PRISM reactor.
Lowen says now is the time for the United States to reassert its leadership on the nuclear stage.
It's our technology, and we should exploit it.
10,000 scientists and engineers are at work to prove that atomic energy does not mean only the atomic bomb.
Power, even at 3 Mile Island, where the remaining reactor still provides electricity for 800,000 homes.
The United States is running 104 reactors safely, 20% of our electricity.
Well, I hear the phrase nuclear renaissance. Are we in the midst of a nuclear renaissance?
We're in it. And the reason why we're in it is because they're building 50 plants, 50 new nuclear power plants across the world. GE Hitachi is still building reactors. We're building them in Taiwan. We're building them in Japan. We've never stopped.
Dozens of new nuclear power plants are being built around the world, but only one of those is, finally, being built in the United States.
We have equivalent to about 5 football fields that we have excavated down 90 feet. So it's a pretty massive project.
It's a massive project with a massive price tag, $14 billion for 2 reactors that utility giant Southern Company is building in eastern Georgia. If all goes as planned, the reactors will start up in 2016 and 2017, providing lots of carbon-free electricity, but also generating lots of radioactive waste.